My proposal is nuclear deterrence, a grand old concept with a bright future, and it's quite timely. It's part of my main study fields, actually, Middle East and nuclear non-proliferation. But lately, as we see, we are speaking more and more about nuclear proliferation than non-proliferation. So just a few thoughts about a few takeouts on theoretical perspective, few words about second strike and what that means, and to discuss a little bit about what credibility means, and a few conclusions. So, since the detonation of the atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we are about 1 month away from commemoration of August 1945 bombings. Nuclear weapons have been considered to be the ultimate weapons, incomparable to any other weapon system. However, after the end of the Cold War, the understanding largely detached them from the portfolio of conventional military. As we know, Fukuyama told us that the end of history is here, and basically the nuclear issue and the nuclear discussion has pretty much been put aside. However, this paradigm has changed dramatically, particularly in the last 2 years after the invasion of Ukraine. But also, as we see what is happening, what happened recently in the Middle East, and we all know the ongoing and never-ending story about the Iranian nuclear program and all the anxieties, worldwide anxiety around it. So one of the main concerns of the research and decision makers alike has become the nuclear deterrence strategy. This old concept, we remember that we've been speaking, actually, the people of that time were speaking about it a lot during the Cold War period. And it was a nightmare for United States and the former Soviet Union. But again, I do believe, actually, and as the reality shows, that the concept of deterrence, nuclear deterrence, have a bright future again. So this article will discuss in a wider form, extensive form, the nuclear deterrence in the 21st century, both from a sociological perspective, proposing a debate on nuclear arming behavior, and from the perspective of defensive realism, used as a justification for the renegotiation of the nuclear order. Just a brief takeout on a sociological perspective, nuclear weapons as symbols of omnipotence appear to be particularly attractive devices for some states in their aim to display power for this purpose. These states are typically those states that lost the last major power war and or have increased their power after the international order was established and the benefits were allocated. From a realist point of view, the very presence of nuclear weapons, even in small numbers in some states, for example, like Israel, India, Pakistan, or North Korea, is the best deterrence doctrine. The concept of mutual assured destruction, MAD, as we know it, second strike, credibility and rationality in deterrence are the main concept around this paper arguments is built. So right now we have 8 overt nuclear powers and 1 covert nuclear power, Israel, and few others nuclear aspirants, making the nuclear phenomenon more global than ever. New nuclear players may still emerge in the next decades in East Asia, Middle East, South Asia. We have here the estimated global nuclear warhead inventories as for 2025. These are actually ready to use. The big numbers here, 3,700, these may be put up in use in United States, Russia, and China from the nuclear triad. That meaning is from sea, land, and air. And the other small nuclear powers, as we see them here, they have basically 1 or 2 capabilities to launch them. However, we still have retired, but as we see here, 93% of the global nuclear arsenal is owned by Russia and the United States. We know that recently there has been many talks about France here with 300 warheads to assure a nuclear umbrella for Europe under the new developments of security between Europe and United States, so on and so forth. But it's actually the reality that France cannot assure any nuclear umbrella or deterrence beyond its own borders. So let's talk a bit about second strike. What means? We have this 2025 Global Trends report, which says that actually the risk of nuclear weapon use over the next 20 years, we have this risk, although remain very low, it's likely to be greater than it is today. Lessons from the past nuclear crisis are various numbers, including crises in Asia, the proclaimed center of strategic affairs of the 21st centuries. At the moment, we live in a world where the few small states with highly destructive capabilities have acquired the ability to present strategic challenges to major nations. They benefit from the rapid spread of technology as well as from not quite responsible past or present military or dual-use international cooperation. However, confrontation among big states with widely different approaches to low stability and use of force may come back within some decades. This possibility may seem remote, but it is already visible on the horizon. This time, new domains such as space and cyberspace will be part of the battle. In some ways, this battle has already begun. In cyberspace, for example, attacks are now taking place on a daily basis in peacetime, mainly for espionage purposes, and these domains pose difficult challenges to deterrence, attribution, for example, and they require new seeking. So, are the nuclear weapons, while less central, becoming more dangerous? As I said previously, this Global Trends report is saying that yes, within the next 2 decades, we might be facing a nuclear war. The idea of MAD, mutual assured destruction, is thought to be a legacy of the Second World War, the first one in which people began to take seriously the possibility that the outbreak of the world would touch an orgy of immediate, almost annihilation. Absent the reality of 60 million dead at least, it may indeed have been more difficult to think in terms of destroying the 10 largest cities in the United States and the Soviet Union. The importance of the second strike capability came from conventional warfare and was adapted to the nuclear era. It was a decisive concept, notably when the Soviets acquired the ability to strike American cities. It is often wrongly associated with the counterforce as opposed to counter-value concept, which was meant to give more options to political leaders. Actually, the first strike demands lots of counterforce weapons to destroy and harden underground silos, for example. The weapons that were protected from the first strike were not accurate enough for counterforce attacks. The second strike concept, therefore, did not rule out cities, but added a threat to military targets. Such was the explanation provided by Robert McNamara himself to a Congress statement in 1963. In planning for our second strike force, he said, we provided a capability to destroy virtually all the soft or semi-hard military targets of the Soviet Union and a large number of their fully hardened missile sites, with an additional capability in form of protected force to be employed or held in service for use against urban and industrial areas. So stability, basically what we are, it is, this dream is over. So basically we are not living any longer in the bipolar era as we did before 1990s. And the new terms, new concept of multipolarity, it's actually a nightmare for many policy decision makers, because there are, as I said earlier, many small states ready either to engage in proliferation or in different type of hybrid warfares, which might engage maybe different types of wars or instruments. Moving forward, Credibility, is it a relevant concept or it's an outdated one? We can speak about second strike versus or parity, about strategic superiority and how we define that strategic superiority, because as we see in, I'm going to link what I'm going to say now to the previous presentation. We see, for example, that Israel definitely has a strategic superiority and technologically advanced in comparison with Hamas. However, Hamas managed somehow to take by surprise on October 7 all the entire field of community of Israeli intelligence and Israeli army and so on, so forth. So we have this paradox. We have some vulnerable societies and invulnerable weapons. So defining parity was a constant problem during the Cold War, and it seems to be exactly like this nowadays. What exactly should be compared on both sides? It was tempting to look at parity from an essentially quantitative perspective, but that approach was soon understood to be mistaken. Qualitative elements related to weapon systems had to be taken into account, and there were other attributes of powers beside military ones. In the United States, for example, the numbers became less and less important as the stockpile of the Soviet nuclear arsenal grew. A survival retaliatory force was what mattered for efficient deterrence. During the strategic arm limitation talks, known as SALT, the American objective was essential equivalence, defined as conferring no unilateral advantage to either side. A most favorable imbalance was sought to allow political pressure or raise doubts about direct and extended deterrence. As Secretary of Defense, former Secretary of Defense Harold Brown put it, essential equivalence allowed guarding against any danger that the Soviets might be seen as superior, even if the perception is not justified. Also, Henry Kissinger famously asked at a press conference in Moscow in 1974, so the question was, what in the name of God is strategic superiority? What is the significance of it politically, military, operationally, at the levels of numbers? What do we do with it? The question might have been misplaced then, as Kissinger himself recognized some years later, but it may make sense at the time when Washington seems to consider nuclear weapons as a remnant of the Cold War, while rising and a weaker nation find them increasingly relevant. So nuclear weapons are ideal weapons for aggressors because of their ability to inflict destruction and terror on vulnerable cities, and Oppenheimer saw them as weapons of aggression, of surprise, and of terror. This characteristic gave an edge to the offense. The protection of civilians has been a matter of intense and emotional debate since the inception of the nuclear age. So basically, we have these still vulnerable societies in face of these invulnerable weapons. Important questions remaining regarding of this offense-defense balance and debate in the 21st century. The problem is whether there will be or should be a shift toward defense, because as we see now, for example, in the case of Russian invasion in Ukraine and of the attack on Israeli attack on Iran, okay, debatable if it was preemptive strike, legitimate or so on and so forth, but it was a fact. We have this new debate. So, unfortunately, this concept concerns actual matters of life and death. In the current military and political environment, it is no longer inconceivable that the war between US and Russia could break out in just few days in the event of crisis. Such a conflict might culminate with an exchange of nuclear strikes taking as long as just few hours. I'm going to conclude. So the dual nature of nuclear deterrence arises from the blurred distinction between the use of nuclear deterrence as a political tool to prevent war and the practical use of nuclear weapons as a means of warfare. After all, any deterrence is only feasible if it relies on the material basis of nuclear weapons and on the willingness to use them in accordance with military doctrine, strategy, and operational plans. Just to quickly conclude, we all know that the last treaty signed between US and Russia, New START Treaty, will expire on February 2026. And these new wars in Ukraine and between Israel and Iran, they already caused this new debate about the ongoing or maybe the prospects of proliferation regional and worldwide. So basically, we have to put on the table this nuclear deterrence issue is a guarantee or a threat to strategic stability. I want to finish with this last quote from Daniel Ellsberg. He passed away recently, actually last year. And we all know him from the famous whistleblower about the Department of Defense Pentagon plans of nuclear war with Russia. So, like it or not, the language of threat and ultimatum is today. The language of diplomacy. It is for many an unfamiliar discourse, a political system in which some are making threats and others are ignoring them. The ability to coerce is a form of power, perhaps the most important form of underlying calculation of the balance of power. Thank you.